Everything makes things anonymous narration, like if you have a billion group.
So
You're like,
people
you
like
know,
this,
there's out, let's take devices away. You're not getting.
Yeah.
Try anonymous narration. That's crazy. You got to play on it, you got, you know, you have to.
No, you are the.
But.
You are my problem now. You said it in front of me.
But if you're able to make it out of it, that's pretty good. I don't know if it's for those. Yeah. Do you, does the kid do their
I mean, the only time I've been rereading all the things I've been doing. I'm gonna try to take it.
Once you get they already know.
So she has, it's like, no, where it can like, do you know the story by Judy Boys? I didn't know the lyric of that. And yeah, everyone like, you know, it was pretty. Yeah. She was like, she didn't know how.
Okay, so, and she was, no,
Yeah, it's not language. Yeah, and then. When I play like I can only play one, two. Yeah, it's kind of cute, you know, that she has this thing. Yeah. It's like, I don't know, like, how.
The one person that engaged.
Yeah, she's out for the time too.
Okay.
But at least she has.
The
whole thing is just funny. Yeah, the whole thing is, you'll see, I'm excited, I've done this. You know, I put it down, design the course, you know.
Yeah. You know, if you're gonna, maybe. Start with that, piano, where the expectations is not, you gotta go on time, et cetera.
Yeah.
Salary, your grades, telling them what really enjoy.
Yeah.
See that. Did you get all it? So that there, which is
I think you see,
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
which side is she to sit on?
What's that? Yeah, she should be on the side close. But that's during the conversation, so you're fine. Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, yeah, we're gonna start momentarily. Thanks a lot. Let's wait for Meryl to come back.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you all for being here. I'm here to introduce our guest tonight, Essie Chambers. Essie Chambers is an author and award-winning producer. Her critically acclaimed best-selling debut novel, Swift River, was the June Read with Jenna book club pick. Swift River was longlisted for the 2024 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, the Center of Fiction First Novel Prize, and the Barnes & Noble Book of the Year. It was the winner of the 2024 Barnes & Noble Discover Prize. Essie started her career as a television executive and filmmaker and was a producer on the Oscar-shortlisted documentary Descendant, which was released by the Obama's Higher Ground Production Company and Netflix in 2022. Essie earned her MFA in creative writing from Columbia University and has received fellowships from MacDowell, Vermont Studio Center, and Baldwin for the Arts. She lives in Brooklyn, but in her heart remains a small town girl from Greenfield, Massachusetts. So please join me in welcoming Essie Chambers.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I feel like it was just yesterday. This is my first in-person class with other writers. And that's exciting. So I've done Zoom classes since ever. I mean, I was on your side. That's the last time that I remember being in this kind of situation, so it's absolutely wild. So I'm really happy to be with you guys, especially because I can say out loud in front of people what this man has done for me. Most of you are his student. I hope you know how lucky you are already, but he had a profound impact on this book. He was my thesis reader. And then we became friends, and then I just suckered in him to being just a reader. And so he really, at a very critical stage, pushed me on form and character. It just pushed me in general, because I think I thought I didn't know how to write a novel and thought there was a way to do it. And as you know, that you know him, and he will say there is no one way to do it. And so I just cannot thank him enough. I made you read this a lot of times, I think. At least 3, right? Oh my God. That's a friend. That's a reader. That's the reader you want. So I'm going to read the prologue and a little bit from the first chapter, just to give you kind of broad strokes of the book. Do they know what the book is about? It starts as a coming of age and opens up into this family saga that spans multiple generations. There are different perspectives. At the center is the Newberry family. And Diamond Newberry is this 16-year-old girl who is struggling with what it means to be the only Black person in this all-white, crumbling New England mill town. The main part of the story is set in 1987 in the 80s, but it does go back and forth in time. And it starts at the beginning of this really, really fraught, important summer for her. And at a certain point in the summer, she gets connected to a relative that she's never met. Oh, I should say her father has been gone for 7 years. He disappeared 7 years prior. So there's sort of father mystery happening too. But she gets connected with a relative that she's never met. And it sort of opens up this correspondence that reveals family secrets, town secrets, and this very rich ancestral legacy that she never knew she had. So the prologue is kind of written from the perspective of Diamond, but kind of ageless. And then I'm just going to read a tiny bit from the first chapter, just so you can get a flavor of her voice. And that chapter, she's 16. I haven't read this in a long time. Okay. Prologue. Can everyone hear me okay? I guess we're right in front of me. Picture my pop's sneakers, worn out and mud-caked from gardening, neatly positioned on the riverbank where the grass meets the sand. This is the place where the Swift River is at its widest and deepest, where a jungly mix of trees makes you feel like you're all alone in the wild somewhere, even though the road is so close you can hear cars humming on the other side. We'd come here as a family on hot summer nights, the one spot where we could splash around freely without people staring at our black, white, and brown parts. Ma even swam naked sometimes, her pale body like a light trail moving through the dark water. Pop couldn't swim. He'd stand hip deep, hold me high in the air, and launch me out from his arms like a cannonball. Over and over again, I'd paddle back, his proud fluorescent smile my beacon. July 1st, the current is extra strong and the water is churning, restless, as my grandma Sylvia would say, from summer rains. Pop leaves early that morning, long before Ma and me are out of bed. He forgets to make me breakfast before he goes. He leaves the car in the driveway. When Ma comes downstairs, she frowns at the door, wrestling with something on the other side of it. She moves to the window and beams her worried look out into the distance. I decide not to put sugar on my cereal, even though no one's paying attention. Answers come to questions I don't ask. There isn't enough gas in the car for both her and Pop. She has to get to her job, and he has to go find one. He must be off on foot somewhere. 2 days later, his shoes turn up. Tucked inside them, his wallet and house keys. Pop is gone. All through the next week, men in boats dragged long hooks and nets across the river. They look like the fishermen we saw in Cape Cod 2 summers ago, except these nets are out to snag a person, my person. The men pull out a tricycle, a mattress, and a dead deer whose antlers were stuck in the mud, but no Pop. The search moves outward from the water, farther and farther away from those sneakers, to the deepest parts of the surrounding woods, to the abandoned factories up and down the river, to hunters' cabins and tool sheds, under porches and inside our house, all through the dank, dirty basement Pop wanted to turn into a TV room one day. Then back to the water again, where it fizzles. Soon, summer is gone too. Fall comes and I start the 4th grade, life snapping back to its normal ways, as if I don't have a missing dad and a mom who's afraid to let me leave the house, but also forgets to feed me. At school, we read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I am the tallest and the smartest one in my class. I am also the only Black person at school, and now that Pop is gone, the only Black person in the whole town. The kids call my dad Nigger Jim because he's Black, he's somewhere in a river, and he has no shoes. Mrs. Durkin hands out detentions, hugs me, and pulls her long fingernails through my knotted curls, saying, "Kids can be so cruel, but if you just ignore them, they'll leave you alone." I cry into her chest because she's so nice and so wrong, and I wish I didn't know this with such certainty. Pop stays gone. Gone hangs in the air without landing, and after a time, a summer, a fall, and then a summer, gives permission to fill in gaps with meanness and nonsense. Like, Pop was murdered by a racist serial killer who scalped him and used his afro as a dust mop. Or he went for a swim and was pulled out to sea by water Sasquatch. Or he faked his own death and is off somewhere with stolen money, a new life, and a new white wife. Years pass and the story turns one last time. Now Ma and me are the beasts. We hitchhike through town, seducing men, robbing them, and jumping out of moving cars. We wander along the banks of the river at night, looking for some secret thing my father buried before he took off. When the fireflies are so thick they look like mini lanterns and a stray pulse catches a passing car, they say that's us, Diamond and Ma, up to their old tricks, out with their flashlights digging for treasure. I don't hear this dumb shit until I'm long gone from that place. Back to us 3. Before I am a river beast, before the kids hold their breath as they pass my house, before I lose my name altogether, before all of this. I am a small brown girl in the backseat of a VW Bug, watching the pavement flash through the rust holes in the car floor like it's TV. Ma and Pop are in the front. Cut that out, Ma says without turning around as I toss things through the holes experimentally. A smooth stone from the river, a penny, a broken Happy Meal toy. They clack against the bottom of the car. We are on one of our Sunday 2 days after payday full tank of gas drives, a family luxury. I lift my head to catch the side of the road action flying by. Farm stands and yard sales, wood piles and jerry-rigged rabbit coops, dumb dogs tied to trees, choking themselves trying to nip at our tires. What if we just kept going and never came back, Pop asks us. What about my toys, I say after some thinking. Come on now, we can always get some more toys, he says, winking at me in the rearview mirror. We can't leave my mother alone in this town, Ma says. She's not in on a joke. We can always get another mother, Pop says. I can't see Ma's face, but when Pop reaches out to touch her cheek, she swats his hand away. Diamond and her toys need space in the back seat, so we'll have to strap Sylvia to the roof, he says. I picture one of Grandma's beige stockinged legs, thick ankles puffed out around her sparkly dancing shoes, dangling next to my window. Ma tries not to crack, but when she chuckles, her whole body shakes. Time is bent. Everything I could ever want is in this car, except for Grandma Sylvia. I calculate that loss and decide to embrace what's there. Ma's feet out the window, her donkey laugh, Pop's off-pitch humming of no recognizable song, his big hand rubbing the back of Ma's neck with careful fingers like he's afraid he might snap it. Time is shaken. We've never even lived in this town. We're just passing through. Where we're from, all the people are kind and brown like me. Simon and Garfunkel on the radio, the only living boy in New York. I am the only living girl in Swift River Valley. A mosquito trapped in the car chomps out a constellation on my legs. I dig into the pink bumps with my nails, carving out tiny blood crosses. I'm excited for the scabs to come so I can pick them. Should we keep on going, Sweet Pea? Pop says again, looking in the back seat at me. Ma, the nag, is locked out of the conversation now. Yes, 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 I say, stomping my feet against the front seat partition. Keep going. Time is folded in half. There is no us 3. Black people live here. They call this town home. They are mill workers and cobblers, carpenters and servants. A Negro church sits next to a Negro schoolhouse. The mill bell carves up their days. They fill the streets of the quarters, voices calling out to each other morning and evening. Clotheslines stretch across yards like flags marking a black land. In one night, they're gone. Those were my people. This isn't a mystery or a legend. It's a story about leaving. It starts with my body. My body is a map of the world. So that's the end of the prologue. Should I keep? Yeah. Okay. All right. So chapter 1, 1987. The summer after I turned 16, I am so fat I can't ride my bike anymore. So I let it get stolen on purpose. You got a new boyfriend? Ma, the smartass, yells out the living room window, laughing through her smoker's cough when she sees me lying on the ground in front of our house, wrapped around the bike with a bucket and a cleaning rag. You humping that thing? She asks. I ignore her and she leaves me be, puffing away on her Newports, a faceless blob in the dirty window screen. The whole house looks like it's having a cigarette. It's hot out, and the bike is fiery from lying in the yard all morning. I'm curled around the frame so I can get to all of its parts. It's the only position my body will allow. I scrub at the street crime until a bright red frame pokes through for the first time in years. It mocks the rest of the junk around it. Skeleton lawn chairs, broken push mower, Pop's dead car in the driveway. You trapped under there? Ma shouts as she watches me struggling to stand. She is testing my forgiveness with her stupid jokes. An hour ago, she told me she got herself fired again, this time for telling off her boss at the fertilizer store after he refused to pay for another sick day. Now we will have to live off my check from the TP Motel, the same job she had when I was little. I keep reminding her that we'll have to choose between electricity and heat once the winter comes, but she tells me not to worry myself, that adults plan things and their kids don't always have to know about it. I have my ways, she sings from her crater in the couch. Ma is the break in the long line of family who work the same one job their whole lives. I am a break in their pure Irish stock, the first Black person, the end of the whites. Something blocking your ears? She tries again. I decide I will not speak to her for 2 days. I'll stop there.
There we go.
So actually, Rachel, the way for.
Okay. Is this weird? Yeah, it's weird. Okay, cool. I love that. I forgot about the first chapter and hearing that again
Actually,
after.
what I meant, wait, I really late.
Oh, okay.
You.
Okay. Yeah, as I was saying, hearing the prologue again after finishing the whole book really resonates in a whole new way. But
Thank you.
I just watched Descendant too, and I just wanted to bring that up because I noticed so many thematic similarities between these two books, and specifically sort of the way, tapping into sort of this ancestral family history is really the way to unlocking the self, unlocking the power of the self, particularly finding that through like oral history. So yeah, I was wondering, like, for this project for Swift River, like, how did you unlock it? Is sort of like writing a historical narrative, and then also just for like this specific character in this story.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad you picked up on something that is very important to me, which is the oral history part of this. I worked on this novel for almost 9 years. And so, very different parts of myself were showed up to write different parts of the book. And I was kind of lucky enough that I was sort of at the end of a first draft when I was making Descendant. And so they're kind of in conversation with each other. Descendant is about, have people heard of the Clotilda? It was the last slave ship to bring to, you saw the movie off, yeah. So, we started off the movie thinking we were writing about the search for this slave ship, which had been burned and sunk to destroy the evidence. And then they found the ship very, very, very soon after. And so it really was about the descendants who lived in this place called Africa Town. And their insistence on telling this story, which people call a myth, which is not a myth to them. And it sort of struck me with really, with force that, oral history is not a lesser history. And particularly for marginalized communities, that's often how history is carried. And this book is also very much about what happens when we stop telling our family stories. There is a rupture in this kind of communal memory, and that's what Diamond, my main character, is learning. Is she never had any of her family stories. So the way that I came to it, and actually, I feel like Robert, the version that you read was just a coming of age story, the initial version. It started out, it was a girl whose father was missing and who had all, this complicated mother she wanted to escape from, and she was learning to drive in secret. And I realized I understood clearly what she was running from, but I did not understand what she was running towards. And so as I kind of got clearer about what she was missing, I started to create the layers for her. So she had a journey to go on. And I was doing some research I wanted to find any history I could on Black communities in rural New England in the early 20th century, because I wanted to find roots for the father character. And I just really couldn't find much of anything except for this one book called Sundown Towns, A Hidden Dimension of American Racism, which it turns out is the only book written on the history of sundown towns. And do people know what sundown towns? No. Okay. So sundown towns are essentially all white towns created by design, whether that's laws and ordinances and redlining or terror and violence and murder. It's everything from, the stories that you hear of Black communities being chased out to just being kept out. And between 1890 and the 1960s, thousands of these towns were created. And I always put them in my mind in the South, and I was shocked to discover that they were primarily in the North, kind of like in response to the Great Migration. And so that blew my mind, and I knew instantly I wanted. To tell you where the name comes from, they would often put signs, sometimes right next to the welcome sign of the town, saying, Black people, you are free to move through during the day, but if you're caught after the sun sets, you will be hurt or killed. And I'm saying that much nicer than the signs. And so that's where it comes from. So I knew that I was going to make that's what I read the book and devoured everything I could find on sundown towns. And there was a passage in the book about exceptions that were sometimes made for one or two people who were allowed to stay if they were serving some essential function to white people. And then that is when I sort of got the idea, like, I'm going to make Diamond descended from the one person that was allowed to stay behind after the rest of the Black community was chased out. And so in that way, I was able to tell these two layers of story about being the only one, and then create this mythology and this entire history for the family. So
no, that's so interesting, because I feel like when we get to that point in the novel, when we start getting the letters, all of a sudden it really opens up in the way that it's really unexpected, and it's like structurally, the way this novel is structured, it's just so
it's like she's taking driver's ed and making a first friend, and then all of a sudden it's a turn.
But I wanted to talk more about sort of like the form, letter writing as a form of a novel. So I guess you kind of answered like what brought you to that, but like in what ways was that challenging, like from a writing perspective?
So challenging. I mean, I am not an epistolary girl. I did not think I was going to write a book that relied so heavily on letters. But what I knew is that I wanted Diamond to get information that would show up as ripples in her life, but it was happening all over the course of 3 months. So there's not a lot that could change in 3 months. And what I really didn't want to happen was like, she learns something and then goes to the library to learn more. Like I was trying to avoid earnestness. And so it was my way to avoid earnest. So I actually, in the book, you don't even see her letters back to either her Aunt Lena or this, she wouldn't be writing to the distant cousin, but her Aunt Lena, who is alive, is giving her these letters from this distant ancestor. And so, I did a lot of work with my editor on making sure that there was enough connective tissue between all, so that you could see the impact of what she was hearing, and learning about herself without it interrupting the present day plot and becoming a history lesson. And I wanted each of the stories to have their own, to feel like their own stories. You know, I wanted the letters to feel like they had their own arc.
No, they definitely, it definitely achieves that. Yeah, I do have, I guess, when writing, like, I guess since a lot of us are writers here, like, what would you have any advice for people to like contrive the correct form to tell the story that you want to tell, I suppose, you know, because you're talking about like the editing process.
Yeah.
Like, is that something that you achieve more in going back to edit, or is it something that sort of just derives from the expression of the voice, maybe?
I think it really depends on the, I mean, I think the most important thing is to let the story be what it wants to be. And I, you know, I'm kind of like, I'm a Virgo and I'm like a firstborn. And so, you know, I need structure. It's kind of like jazz. Like I need a container, and then I just go crazy inside of it. For me, the voice is the most important thing. And that's always what comes first. And then the voice leads me to the story. And then the story leads me to the structure. Some people don't write that way. I mean, it really is about knowing yourself and who you are as a writer and what you need. And for me, what I need, every sentence, I have to feel something very strongly. And so a lot of my writing process is like, I'm just chasing after the spark that will make me feel something. And sometimes that is, and that's, you know, you discover in editing, you know, reading stuff out loud. I had this Deborah Eisenberg. I had Deborah Eisenberg as a teacher at Columbia, and she said this great thing where if you're reading back your own work and you're tempted to skip through anything, then that is exactly what needs to be cut. Because if you are tempted to skip through, like, what, you're not going to bore your, yeah. So, knowing myself, and it took a long time for me to develop a practice that was not about what I thought a writer should be doing, which was like page count and word count. And that's the death of writing for me. I cannot produce like that. For me, it's about developing a kind of integrity around doing something that I tell myself that I'm going to do. And so I need to feel inspired by the 2 sentences that I produce in a day or whatever, you know. So I would just say the voice and your characters, and let it lead you to where it does.
No, it's such a strong voice in this novel.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think I have another question that's kind of related to form. So I think absence takes up a lot of space in this novel. It's a plot device because we have the absence of the father, the absence of other Black people in the town. And then it's also this great part of the form itself, because with the letter writing, like remembering family history, it is an imperfect history. She doesn't have the complete story. She has parts of the story that she's able to, like, you know, get a lot out of. So I guess how did you figure out how to leave all these things out, like leaving the right things out? And I'm sure it took a lot of restraint because, you know, as we're talking about writing towards something, writing towards a voice, collecting, but then also drawing back, you know, restraint too.
It's a great question. And yeah, because I mean, I say in the beginning of the book, like, this isn't a mystery. I didn't want it to be a mystery, but it's such a, okay. So in an early draft of the book, the father, in the first draft that you read, Robert, the father had his own voice and his own perspective. And enough people told me, like, I just can't wait to get back to Diamond. I don't really care about him. I knew I wasn't nailing the voice. And I also realized this is a story about the women in this family, and the father character is far more effective haunting the pages than he is having a voice in them. And so that was the kind of beginning of my understanding. You know, there's so much that's haunted in this book. You know, the town is haunted by its history that it doesn't know about. And so I can be too subtle sometimes. So sometimes it's too much restraint, but sometimes it's adding back in just enough. But I really, so a whole other layer of the book takes place they were originally the father's chapters, but they are flashback going back 7 years to the last year before the father disappeared. And so it's pieces in the voice of this 9-year-old at that kind of moment when, you know, when your parents start to come into focus and you're like, oh, wow, they're real and they're fucked up. And, you know, like, it's sort of that moment where where they're becoming real to her, and where she's starting to understand her father is completely falling apart. And so I got to, because it was from a 9-year-old perspective, I could be a little bit more poetic about it. And so there is that entire layer that's happening. And I think, I don't know if that's answering your question though, but that layer helped me with what I was leaving out in the present day chapters, because you were, it's sort of, even though you were going back and forth in time, you were getting pieces of information that was really critical to understanding what's happening.
Yeah, that's also something those chapters really illuminate the book, I think, in a way. Yeah, and offers sort of diversifies the narrative. We see this other perspective of her when she's younger. It also kind of answers a question I was going to ask you, which, because, if she's a teenager, there's these letters, and then there's also her younger self. And I wanted to know, like, where did you first meet like Diamond as a character? Like, where did she first come to you?
I had her voice in my head for so long, and I didn't know what the story would be. And I think at some point, I had her like on a road trip. I had all these crazy things going on. And I think what I was resisting, just talking about this the other day, like this idea, when you're writing fiction, then people are going to assume it's, auto fiction. And, I was fighting populating this book with things that were also true in my life. And then I realized, no, that's what this book wants to be. So I also grew up, it is complete fiction, but I was one of the only people of color in the town that I grew up in. And it became very important to me to tell that story, because I feel like, particularly in rural places, there's just not a lot of that story. And this idea that I wanted to write an outsider character. I love fish out of water weirdos. I love, and I wanted her to be figuring out how do you form an identity as a Black person in the absence of Black culture and identity, and how do you self-actualize when you don't have anyone that looks like you, whose path that you can watch and follow, and what does that do to your identity? And I that is part of the Black American experience, not outside of it. And so that's sort of, I'm trying to think at what point. I think I probably wrote a bunch of short stories and bits and pieces over the years, and then I realized, no, that's the story that I need. I need to tell that story.
Yeah, you can't resist it. I think that's so interesting you saying that too, because you kind of fulfill what we were talking about earlier about, understanding your own history as a way of like unlocking something. Yeah. So
yes.
Cool.
And actually, I discovered, I really did learn so much about how I felt about my growing up in the writing of the book. And then in going back to my hometown and being like given like the heroes. Well, I thought everybody would hate me because it's a tough story, but I was like, it was like the hero's welcome. It was absolutely wild. And I discovered after the fact, as I was working on essays about sundown towns, that I grew up in the town I grew up next to is a sundown town. It was a sundown town. And when I started digging even further at my own town, and looking into like census data, like a historian had told me like, oh, there was once a Black community there, which I'd never heard of. And there was a Black church, and there was a point at which they sort of all disappeared. I don't know that it was an event, but there were Black people there, and then there weren't by the time my family got there, which means I probably wrote a book that mirrored my own life without knowing that until after I finished the book. So talk about like being haunted. I mean, it was just, I was meant to write the story.
No, I'm sure like you had some sense, yes,
Yeah.
like a second sense or something. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that really makes me think too about, I'm thinking of Descendant again. There's a really great moment where they're talking about the story of the Cotilda and I can't remember his name, but the ancestor who
Credulous, yeah.
Credulous,
The subject of Barracoon, if you guys haven't read it, by Zora Neale Hurston. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're talking about that story, and someone says, oh, it's a sad story. And the Descendant, he says, no, he won because his story's here. It's remembered. And like, we are still the descendants. Like,
I could cry just hearing you say that. I'm very close to him. It's Emmett Lewis. part of what was so remarkable for me in making that movie is if you're in his presence, he feels like royalty. I mean, he is the great, I don't know how many greats, but grandson of Cudjo Lewis. And they are living history because they're the only people that actually can say my ancestors were on this particular ship. And so the way that he embodies spirit is otherworldly. And so kind of seeing them in their journey, and they became quite famous, after the ship was found and everyone descended on the town. And the way that they were filled up with their history, I was like, like I want to communicate that experience of getting filled up and knowing who you are for Diamond.
No, totally. And she does sort of achieve something. It's very satisfying because, those beginning chapters of the book, like you really leave the reader in a place where we feel very uncomfortable, similar to the way Diamond feels. Like she's very uncomfortable. And there's also this language of grief, with her father. But then you're able to balance it in such a way that there's also comedic elements and like moments of great relief and empowerment, or like once we reach the conclusion of it. So I guess going back to sort of craft and writing, like how do you navigate like balancing those moments as a writer? Staying in the uncomfortable when we need to be there, alleviating it. How did you navigate that, I guess?
I mean, having her be funny without being the funny fat girl was incredibly important to me. Just because that was the voice that I heard in my head. And also she's carrying a lot of painful things. And I think that that's how we experience the world, with joy and pain living very closely to each other. And so I always had, I had this, I'm sure you all have like Post-its and things that you say to, yourself, little mantras. And mine was tell the truth and make yourself laugh. That was always my filter. And then at a certain point I realized, oh no, that's also Diamond. And so if she was being, I would sometimes know what was going to happen in a scene. And then it's like, how can I crack myself up? How can this be as weird as possible? And it's just all about her filter. And I'm wrangling every sentence to the ground with that in mind, and creating, a lot of it was language, like creating a language that felt very specific to her. And inevitably I would try and squeeze some comedy out of the language and what she was seeing, but with so much intention. It was very important to me.
So does the intention for you come on the level of the sentence more so? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting because, you also achieve it in a way where it spans over the whole structure of the novel, in terms of chapter by chapter. But then, I think on the sentence level too, you're able to achieve like a very dynamic page almost.
I will also say that in her relationship with Shelley and her mother, those are my favorite scenes to write because I could bring so much comedy, because the character of Shelley, which is the first friend that she makes, and the mother character are so ridiculous that it was I could really get a lot out of their exchanges too.
No, yeah, so good. And then going back to that moment of empowerment, what I'm thinking of, there's the scene, it's really at the end of the book. She's in the car, she's hitchhiking with her mom, and she says, oh, my great aunt was the midwife of your mother's birth. And it's like, whoa, all of a sudden, like everything sort of rushes towards her. And finally she finds this voice that's like really like affirmative. And I think, that moment was just so striking to me, like reading it.
Thank you. That last chapter just was like, came in a
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's really interesting.
I had read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and it's the power of the letter, of the way that he wrote the letter to his mother. I completely changed the voice in that last chapter so that I just felt like a way to be more intimate with the reader. And so there was something about making that change that made the writing it really just poured out of me.
Yeah, I just read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous for class. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I guess I have to ask, like, do you have any? We have you have this historical influences, like any literary influences, like fiction that you went into this book, maybe.
I always wrote with, I mean, I write with, some people like to avoid reading while they're writing. I write with the books where I want voices and things to inspire me. So, I mean, Toni Morrison is my queen. That was the sort of, so I had Song of Solomon with me in The Bluest Eye. And I love writers like Paul Beatty. And who else did I had poetry, a lot of poetry because I was really, I like Lucille Clifton and Brenda Shaughnessy, people that who's I just wanted their voices in my ear. Who else did I read with? I love George Saunders. I love Miranda July. I love, sort of a very diverse collection that it's mostly about voice and sentence for me in terms of when I was writing this book. I mean, I don't know, my influences, I feel like change, but
Yeah. No, totally. I also wanted to know, like, in Descendant, the ending is kind of like, what do we do next? Like, we have this story, we have this history, like, what are we going to do now that we know this? And, that's kind of the question that Diamond's left with. And she does, she sets off on her next journey, I guess. But I'm guessing, like, especially writing something that you said is kind of close to your own experience, even if unintentionally, like, where does that leave you, I guess, like, as a writer, as a creator, for your next project? Maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't wait to get to work on my next book. I mean, honestly, I know, I was just saying to Robert before, like, the thing that I could have not accounted for, I couldn't have accounted for was the experience of going from being a writer to an author and the job of, what you need to do to get your book out in the world. And I am just not the kind of, I can't do that. And also, right, I just can't, I can't do it. And so I can't wait to get back to writing. And I do have an idea for my next book. And, who knows, maybe like one sentence of what is in my head will end up being, but I know, and the characters are already kind of alive in me. And so I need to clear the space because it's not going to take another 9 years to finish this.
No, totally. I'm sure too, like, there must be some relief, I guess, since you've been working on this for so long, to have it, here in the world now. Yeah.
So much relief. And also, I would say, I think that there was, I had a lot of life going on in those 9 years, but also I think I probably was afraid to finish. And I was afraid that I didn't have any more stories. And, some of this, some of the relief is just the understanding that the well will never dry up. I mean, I have 1,000 more stories to tell, and I just need to find the right books for the stories, So
Yeah, you're making the space for the next part.
yeah,
That's so cool. I don't know. I think we have time. Should we do questions? Yeah. Does anyone have a question for Essie Chambers?
questions, right?
Okay. Oh, cool. Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia.
Hi, Julia.
Earlier you'd mentioned that, like, autofiction was mentioned, and at first you were sort of hesitant of putting some personal details that overlap with, like, life experiences because you don't want to be labeled as, like, oh, this is about you, this, like, conflating author character. But then, like, later it kind of, you were infused in there in other ways, just like organically. And I think as writers, that's sort of something we have to struggle with, just sort of like seeing us all naked in strange places. But I'm wondering, like, how do you decide, like, when you infuse some, like, truths there, it's very intuitive of, like, this happened to me, I know exactly how to write it, but also, like, how do you choose what to, like, incorporate from real life and what to, like, fictionalize?
Yeah. It's a great question. For me personally, I found that the closer to my life that plot or character I couldn't be imaginative in a way. So it was more that I was using my life as an emotional engine underneath. So I was pulling from the feeling of being an outsider and then I was pulling details from. I mean, there are some. It's more like the funny stuff that, because it's the specifics that makes the world unique. And so I might have pulled every now and again, like, small details, but I found it kind of strangled my process the more that I stuck too closely to my life. And in fact, I will admit this. I've talked about this before. The mother character, who is a loon, she's crazy. This is not the way you create a character, but I made her as crazy as she is because I did not want my own mother to see herself in this book. That was the initial impulse. And of course, I then had to make, I mean, then it became a challenge. Like, how do I make this really complicated woman who is very much failing as a parent? How do I make everyone have empathy for her? And so it was an exercise of, and, you know, then I could create this dynamic of two people grieving in different ways. So everything happened like where you start with a nugget and then it blossoms, but it's the feeling that I was mostly pulling from, rather than the details.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful. I feel like sometimes the truth does strangle, like as intuitive it is
Yeah.
to jot down, it hampers you. But the feeling, I think, stays intense.
I totally agree. And I think the other thing that happens is when you're sticking too closely to your life, this is, again, it's so personal. Everyone has their different experience of this, but you lose perspective on what to cut because it may, your own life seems more interesting. It's like talking about your own dream or something, like that might be boring to somebody. So I don't find that I have the right perspective when I'm pulling to, particularly with plot.
Yeah, thank you. That's so helpful.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allie.
Hi, Allie.
Hi. So I was wondering, it seems like history and the way history informs like identity and the self is important in this novel. And I was wondering about from the level of like a question, like if there are questions that kind of like haunt you and when you write books or that kind of like follow you through your books, or each book kind of tackles a different question for you or idea.
I'm very interested in identity and race and class, but I think they're different questions. I think they're different questions. I mean, I'm not a person that's driven. A lot of people, they start with a question that they want to answer, and I land on that question later, when the world is coming together and I'm sort of interrogating myself, like what am I trying to say here? Like I have all these really interesting people populating this place, and then when I really dig down, that's when the questions come personally. But I do find that I gravitate towards some of the same themes for sure, and have only recently kind of just leaned into that because those are the kind of stories that I want to tell.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
I want to ask you about the publishing process.
Sure. You want me to tell you just how it went? Okay, so do you want to know like each step or how it?
Well, I guess like how were you able to get an agent?
Yeah.
From agent, how
yeah, it's a great question. It took me so long to finish this book. I feel like the universe was like, we're going to make the next part a little easier, because I really did. There was one draft that I had shown Robert, and you were like, it's enough now. You can stop working on this. Like, just get it out there. And I was like, oh, right. You were the first person to tell me, like, with clarity, like the book is going to be sold. Go work on it with your editor. Stop. So by the time I actually sent it out, it was fairly, there's not a lot on a sentence level that changed. My editor and my agent helped me tremendously on structure and lots of other things, but not to take anything away from them. But I that's only to say I just really had worked it to death. And so I sent it out with a query letter to my top choices, and my agent, who was my dream agent, she really, they really do read query letters. We did have a person in common who got to whisper in her ear, which was one of her bigger clients. So, but I gave her she read the first, she wanted to read the first 50 pages. She wasn't going to read the whole manuscript, and she read the first 50 pages. And it was instantly like, send me the whole book and tell me if you're talking to anyone else. She finished the book in a weekend. She's a very fast reader, and made me the offer almost instantly. So she was the right person for me, and I knew that she would be the right person for me. And she's also a door opener. Like, it was a bigger leap from being Essie in the world to getting her as an agent than it was to sell them, because she sells books, period. And so I worked on it with her. Nowadays, you spend quite a bit of time working on your book with your agent before it goes to market. And so I would say, I mean, I know people that spend up to a year doing it. We ended up working on it for maybe three months, quite intensely, and then she sent it out. The intention was to have an auction so that we could get as many publishers who would be interested and want to bid on the book. And we did. We had, like, I think 6 or 7 publishers, and then my publisher Simon and Schuster came in with what's called a preempt, where they essentially say, we're making this offer so that you don't talk to anyone else. And I really connected with, I had this weird thing. My dad died a couple days before I had to start taking these meetings. And so it had the effect, it was awful. I know it had the effect, though, of being clarifying in a lot of ways. I sort of had to, I had to just kind of trust my gut, because I was too tired to do anything else. And so I just really connected with the agent, with my editor, and the woman who ended up being my editor. And so that was October of 2022. We worked on the book for less than a year. And then I found out pretty quickly that the book had been chosen as a Read with Jenna pick for the Today Show. And it kind of gives you, it definitely, I mean, the publisher had already told me in the promises to me that I was going to be a priority for the year for them. And that was part of the reason why I went with them. But that definitely gave me an even bigger boost, because her reach is so big, so that they really want to make sure they're doing as much as possible to support the book. So I learned I came up in television and film. And so I understand the intersection of, like, art and commerce, because that's what I did. But it was fascinating to see it happen from a book perspective, and how fast it happens. And I was just shocked at how fast it happened. So I felt very supported by them. I had a good debut experience with them. Is there anything else? I feel like is there anything else that's you're wondering right now? Okay. It's so varies for, I do feel, again, like I had a good, leap, and it could just as easily, because the market wants different things at different times. And it could have been, it could be this year that nobody would want a Swift River. You just never know. But I do think once you have the right agent, who understands your vision and knows how to support it and understands you, it can take a year or 2 years, but you're on your way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Such a great conversation. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.